Good morning, everybody. Welcome back for day 2 of this American Solidarity Party National Convention. I am very excited to introduce our next speaker. We talked about we need to build on each of our principles and our pillars in this party, and emailed a lot of people that had never heard of us before, and we found one that said, yes, I will come speak. Brian Czech is the founding president of the Center for Advancement of the Steady-State Economy. He has been executive director there since 2017. He's served as a conservation biologist at the headquarters of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He's held a variety of roles. He's been designated as an eco-hero by public employees for environmental responsibility. He's the author of several books, including Supply Shock, Shoveling Fuel for a Runaway Train, and the Endangered Species Act. He's authored over 50 academic journal articles. He's a frequent speaker, commentator, and writer. So, Brian Czech.
Thank you so much, Jack, for the warm welcome, and it's really nice to be here. I'm as excited about you guys, about the ASP, as any of you would be about me, I'm sure, and probably more so. So, I was born at 317 parts per million CO2, 0.74 overshoot ratio, and 1.4 trillion GDP, which in today's dollars would be about 14.2 trillion. And so that gives you an idea, I think, of the connections that I'm going to be drawing, the dots I'll be connecting. One of the main points that I want to leave you with is the fundamental conflict between growing the economy and protecting the environment. And that's one of the reasons that we're so excited about ASP is we've read your platform. We like especially the first plank and the 7th plank or section. And I want to explore those a little bit more today. And by the way, some of these terms may be kind of Greek. I'm going to try not to use a lot of conservation biology jargon and stuff, but that overshoot ratio, in case you're not familiar with that, what that is the ratio between ecological footprint and the biocapacity, the capacity of the planet to support humans. And like I say, I didn't tell you when I was born, but okay, it was 1960, 317 parts per million, overshoot ratio of 0.74. So that was the ecological footprint divided by biocapacity at that time. It was still, starting to push the limits, but still sustainable. Now, the overshoot ratio is close to 200. It's 1.75. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the exact figures. It's about 3 global hectares per person of ecological footprint, and it's 1.6 global hectares per person of biocapacity. So, and how can we do this? How can we be above the capacity of the planet? Well, it's easy. You look around, you drive to this convention, you take a flight around the world, you'll see for yourself how we can do that. We're liquidating stocks of natural capital, and we're loading the atmosphere with greenhouse gases. And so that's how we can do it. We can do it in the short term. And so that means it's not sustainable. And I think that a lot of the social problems that we see today are actually all about the fact that we are at those limits to growth that people used to warn about starting in the 19th century with John Stuart Mill, writing about the need for a stationary state of economy. But Americans would know much more likely about books like The Limits to Growth and books like Steady State Economics and books like Silent Spring. You know, these are books that came out in the 60s and early 70s that forewarned us about limits to growth. So now I want to tell you a little bit more about my own story, how I ended up getting into this stuff we might call ecological macroeconomics, or steady state economics. I was a wildlife biologist just about as soon as I was born. I mean, that's all I could do is spend as much time as I could outside, out in nature, you know, and early on that took the form of things like hunting and fishing, right? You know, I wasn't an environmentalist or anything like that, but I very much fell in love with, creation, right? Life at large, human and non-human species, frankly. Not in a tree-hugging way, but in a appreciation way, and also eventually in a recognition of how all of that non-human life supports us, supports humans. And so I went into the profession first of having fun with it, you know, doing the research. I had some fantastic jobs. I did my master's research on elk at Mount St. Helens after the blast. Yeah. And I shouldn't say I had a blast. I mean, it blasted. So Mount St. Helens, I mapped grizzly bear habitat in the Teton Wilderness area in Wyoming. I managed the biggest elk in the world by antler size on the San Carlos Apache Reservation in Arizona, and things like that. I had some spectacular jobs in the field. But then I started noticing, by then I'm getting into like my early 30s, and I'm starting to notice when I go back to places, because I did a lot of roaming around back then, when I go back to places, already they weren't quite the same. Now there were roads, there were housing developments, there were smokestacks. You know, there wasn't that elk herd, or there wasn't that trout hole, you know? And so little by little that dawned on me that I wanted to make a difference at the national level in conservation policy. And I had no idea how to go about that, really. I didn't have any connections politically at the national level or anything. But I had kind of a naive belief in science and in the logic of taking scientific findings, bringing them to the policy arena, and having them be embraced and utilized. Boy, was that naive. So the way I went about it was I went back to school. I went to the University of Arizona and embarked upon PhD research that would be oriented toward policy. So my minor was political science, and the dissertation was a policy analysis of the Endangered Species Act. And as part of that analysis, this is now in the mid to late 90s, part of this analysis, I had to document the causes of species endangerment in the United States. And so I used the Federal Register notices where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service posts the reasons for why it's listing the species, you know, as threatened or endangered. And then I developed this database of the 877 at the time. Now it's more like 1,300. 877 federally listed imperiled species, meaning threatened or endangered. And then in the columns in this Excel spreadsheet, really, I listed the reasons for the demise of these species. And there were dozens of reasons. Maybe you could have counted 100 or more reasons, but I lumped them, I categorized them into 18 categories. And I remember doing this in the evenings in this tiny little room I was renting in a house in Tucson. And the TV would be on in the next room sometimes. And there was talk leading up already to the 2000 elections. And I remember hearing quite often this rhetoric that there is no conflict between growing the economy and protecting the environment. And while I'm hearing that in my ears, my causes of endangerment are evincing they're a who's who of the American economy. And so I thought, what's going on here? I mean, how could we have the biggest, the smartest, the most powerful people on the planet telling us that there's no conflict when I'm looking at it blow by blow and finding a fundamental conflict? The causes of endangerment, that's the empirical evidence for that conflict. And there's the theoretical basis for that conflict is fully established in the ecological and, generally speaking, natural sciences. I'm going to summarize it in one sentence that you will find in the journal Bioscience from around 2000. I know it by heart because I wrote it. But I'm going to supplement it with one phrase. It's due to the tremendous breadth of the human niche, which expands via technological progress, the human economy grows at the competitive exclusion of non-human species in the aggregate. And that's a really key phrase anytime we're talking about things like limits to growth or ecological macroeconomic. We're talking about in the aggregate. So as the human economy grows now to almost $100 trillion globally of GDP, not everything declines. We have more rats. We have a lot more invasive species in the USA. We have a general ecological unraveling. Ecosystems aren't what they were. The fellow who is recognized as like the father of wildlife ecology, his name was Aldo Leopold, and he has a quote that I think would resonate with people here. It was something to the effect that to be an ecologist is to live in a world of wounds. Wounds, like everywhere you look, it's a degraded ecosystem. You see other folks out there might be driving through a field of, purple loosestrife, and they'll say, oh, how beautiful. But there's no awareness of the fact that that is a function of destruction of tremendous tall grass prairie ecosystems from our ever more distant past. And everywhere you look, there's this type of deterioration in the environment. So now I want to fast forward and then go back there to these 1990s and that rhetoric and stuff. So when I started honing in on this conflict between economic growth and biodiversity conservation, I discovered that the scientific professional community had never touched that topic. there was some microeconomics pertaining to natural resource management, stuff like that, and environmental economics pertaining to, tax incentives to lessen pollution and things like that. But there was no ecological macroeconomics. And so that became sort of my calling, was to fill that vacant niche in academia and then in policy. And CASI, the Center for the Advancement of the Steady State Economy, is a natural outcome of that. But at that time, I still had this naive notion I could go to Washington and bring these findings and get policies reformed. So I attempted that, and there was some early success. I signed on in 1999 in the headquarters of Fish and Wildlife Service, and we were developing a program to raise awareness that, yes, there is a conflict between economic growth and environmental protection, and we were going to inch that toward the Secretary of the Interior and into cabinet level discussions. But that only made it so far, and I started to get gag orders. Yeah. So I, little by little, was prohibited from doing more and more, and allowed to do less and less pertaining to this huge issue. And so finally I quit. I quit the government in 2017, so I could tell the truth and come to places like this without, taking leave all the time from my job and so on. Even off the job, those gag orders haunt you, so it's just no way to live. So that's kind of how I got here today, but I want to go back to those 90s. I went to a conference. Now, since then, I've sworn off flying. I sworn off flying starting a few years ago. But back then, I was doing a lot of conferencing. And I was in Uppsala, Sweden, at an ecological economics conference. And it was maybe 100 people there or so, not a very big conference. And they put us in rooms where we had roommates that we didn't even know before. And I was rooming with a fellow from India. And I forgot how we came into the topic, but we started talking about the world's religions, like the 5 major religions and the sustainability implications among them, with them. And hold on to your seats. And this is the very first time I've ever mentioned this in any kind of public forum. But he mentioned to me that in where he's from, where there's more religious diversity than anywhere else in the world, and there's a great deal of acceptance, especially for all 5 major religious traditions. He was telling me that Islamic teachings at that time were such that families were being exhorted to have 7 kids. I was shocked at the precision of the number. It was 7. It wasn't 6. It wasn't. I don't know the whole calculus of that, but that was the exhortation by the imam in the mosque, was have 7 kids. And the context, our context of sustainability, and with me there as a conservation biologist, I was shocked because when you learn the trade of ecology and conservation biology, one of the basic concepts is called carrying capacity. Every species has there's only so many you can get on a finite landmass like Earth. And I was aware of some of the controversies around that. I grew up Catholic. I was born and raised Catholic. My family was all very traditional Polish Catholic from Wisconsin, in case you're wondering about that. Right? Go back.
What city?
Just on the edge of Green Bay. But if I remember this right, my mom was from between Pulaski and Kosciuszko, and my dad was from Sobieski Corners and Krakow. So, all right, so anyway, I thought to myself, if that's really the case, then we're all doomed. Because there's a thing called doubling time. And you can find this online. It's a fairly complex logarithmic equation to calculate doubling time, but there's a rule of thumb. You can divide 70 by the growth rate and come up with a pretty good approximation of doubling time. So if the growth rate is 0.1, then you're going to double the population in a matter of 7 years. And 7 kids per family, all else equal, is a lot closer to that 0.1 growth rate than it is to a stable population. So his warning there came back into my mind about 10 years later when I was actually asked to speak at an intelligence conference in DC about limits to growth as they affect national security. And believe it or not, there was a fellow in the speakers lineup whose specialty was mosque intelligence. Because, you know, now this is not too long after 9/11. And there again, he provided this information that imams were teaching to have that many kids. The idea is like demographic jihad. And, you know, you don't dare, I hope I will get a fatwa attached to me or whatever, but we got to talk openly about these kinds of things. And I'm not, at this conference, I don't want to talk about it so much from a political or even a theological perspective, but more from an ecological and sustainability and caring for creation perspective. That's not, I'm sorry, folks, that's not caring for creation. Now, nobody's a sinner if they have 7, 8, 9, 10 kids. And in particular, if they never were exposed to that ecological training, you know. But it's not rocket science either. So it's kind of like going forward, can we be, as the Pope seems to be leaning and exhorting us, when he says things like, you know, of course, there's abortion is anathema, but we don't have to breed like rabbits. Yeah, I mean this Pope Francis is very encouraging to us that care about creation at large and that care about not just non-human species, but your kids and grandkids too. You know, this is about the generations to come. 7 generations, a lot of Native American tribes would refer to. And there's not going to be a happy 7th generation if the preceding 6 had 7 apiece. In fact, there barely be a 7th generation if that happened, because we're already at 8 billion people on the planet. And we are suffering limits to growth all around us, and we're in the state of planetary overshoot. So we, CASI, Center for the Advancement of the Steady State Economy, we're like you, like a lot of you. I sat back there yesterday and I listened to every single delegate introduce themselves. And it was wonderful. Just about everybody said things that resonated with me big time. It's embarrassing to live in a country where a guy like Trump can get elected. What the heck happened there? You know, but when you think of the alternative, actually, that's what happened there. My biggest beef, by the way, with Hillary, and in fact, with the whole Clintonian machinery, is that that's where that win-win rhetoric was perfected. There is no conflict between growing the economy and protecting the environment. That was fallacious from the start, and that was evident enough in the 1990s. It's bloody obvious now. And yet we still have a legacy of that type of, I don't know what else to call it, Clintonian win-win rhetoric. Even Al Gore got sucked into that vortex. That, yeah, we can have our environmental cake and eat it too for the sake of GDP growth. Sorry, that's fallacious. It violates every standard rule of ecology and principle of ecological macroeconomics. So I heard people, have the being repulsed at the voting choices from the past few electoral cycles, and it resonates a lot. Now, I understand there were some folks that have been active in the Green Party, and so was I, kind of naturally, right, as an ecologist. I was a member of the Green Party from about 2000 to 2006 approximately. And I was on their platform committee. That was my main rationale, my main push there. And we did get, in the Green Party of the United States, a plank on the steady state economy adopted. I'm not sure if it's still in there or not, but we got it adopted. That was a big deal for us at the time. We're a tiny nonprofit. And, but the problem that I encountered at the Green Party after going to, I went to 2 of their conventions, the Nader one and the next one. And what I discovered was that any issue that would come up, there was like a knee-jerk reaction to just go way to the left, like pretty far to the left on every issue after the next. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, this is not a Green Party. I don't know what you call it, purple with pink polka dots or something. It just, and somebody actually tried to get me to run as their nominee or whatever for presidential candidate, which was crazy enough, but I thought about it at least, what the heck, who wouldn't think about stuff like that if they're asking you to do that? And I rejected the idea in pretty short order. I would have had to quit the job at a time when it was still promising, to speak truth to power from within the government. But also, I discovered this propensity in the Green Party to just go left and left. My slogan was going to be, if I had done that, the slogan was going to be, first things first. We're a Green Party. Let us focus on that protection of our farmlands and our forests and our waters and our green space, the green stuff. And then the rest of the stuff, let's go a little here, a little there, let's be smart politically instead of suicidal politically, boxing ourselves into ever smaller corners. But it was like talking to that wall back there. I see that's made out of brick. So we see, fast forwarding now 20 some years, you guys come along. It's beautiful. I mean, I don't know enough yet. I've read your platform. I've heard people speak, talked with Jack, in the lead up to the conference. None of this is to blame on him though, because I didn't tell him, all this stuff. But, you guys, well, you know this better than I do. There's a lot of people out there waiting just for you. And I think that includes a sustainability crowd. I myself, being born and raised a Catholic and doing my best to hold up my end of deal on that stuff. I have adamantly protected Cassie from taking any sort of pro-abortion stance. And believe me, the pressures have been frequent exactly for that. But we do not do that. In fact, we don't even call for population control. But what we do is welcome the Pope's, findings in the Laudato Si and his recent talk about, not having to read like rabbits, as he put it. Oh my gosh, it's 2 minutes to the next hour, so I've rattled on quite a bit. Jack, do we take questions, or it's kind of late for that? Any questions, or? Yes, sir.
You decided not to fly.
So it's still an ecological footprint to drive from Washington DC, but it's less than half of the
This gets a better scenery.
Yeah.
The gag order. Sorry.
Yeah.
So you can correct me if I'm wrong with respect to the steady state population thing. I think that just to sustain the population, I think we need like a birth rate of 2 to 3 children per couple. And here in this country, we're seeing birth rates lower than that. On average, I think it's 1.9, something like that, where we depend on immigration to maintain and grow our population here. With Gen Z, a lot of them are choosing not to have any kids at all because they're concerned about the legitimate ecological problems we're facing. What role does like consumerism play in that? I mean, we are 5% of the world's population, but we consume 25% of the world's resources. And like, how can we help those younger generations kind of understand that issue, in that we don't need to maintain this level of materialism?
Thank you. Yeah, you hit a lot of nails right on the head. In the 20th century, the American ecological footprint grew so rapidly, but the attribution of that footprint growth to per capita consumption is 4 times that to population growth. So that in the wealthy countries, that is the huge problem. In a lot of more impoverished parts of the world, it's the opposite. It's the population growth rate that's more unsustainable. So how do we do it? Well, there's a long list. I wish there was an ecological economics course required at every college and university, even some principles of sustainability in high school. But the list is long. We'd be happy to talk with you at length anytime. I don't want to go into the next speaker's time. If I haven't already.
The next speaker's at 10:30, so you got.
Oh, wow. Wait a minute, you guys quiet. I got to talk more. So, no, go. Yes, sir.
Just one question. Is the question, is it really a problem of growth itself or the type of growth? And the example I would like to give is that I drove 20 or 25 miles here over the past stretches of concrete. I grew up in New York City, where we had all the transportation you could want for 15 cents. And believe me, if you could steal 15 cents, you didn't belong in my neighborhood. But the choices we have made of the transportation system, and I think that's the primary example, there are others, is there really this conflict between growth and the ecology, or is it the particular choices we made? So as a child in New York, I was king of New York for 15 cents, go wherever I want. My children, of course we had cars, my children grew up in a house with 2 cars and had no transportation. Okay? So we don't even have real outputs, but we have huge expenses. So I wonder if we haven't put a false argument between growth
Yeah,
which
and the
leads to things
environment.
like population control, or whether the choices we have made are the worst possible. I can't think of a less efficient transportation system than giving everybody 2,000 pounds of steel, glass, and plastic.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's,
Is that the real, are we talking about the real choices, or have we manufactured as well?
yeah, that's a great question. And that it's kind of like the $1 million question, really. It's sort of like, can we have green growth? And the thing that tends to be lost in that discussion is that, efficient growth. Can we have efficient, yeah, which some people would refer to as green growth. You know, you get more and more efficient. So there's a number of things. Let me start with the structure of the economy. And in ecology, we learn this in spades. Every economy, the two big ones are the economy of nature and the human economy. But they both, like every economy does, they have a trophic structure. It starts from a foundation and it builds up. And the base of the economy of nature, let's start with that one, it's plants. They produce their own food in the process of photosynthesis. Then when there's enough plants producing enough surplus food, then you can have consumers, the primary consumers that eat the plants. These are, animals, rabbits and deer and so on. And then if there's enough of those populations and species, a surplus amount of those, then you can have secondary consumers. So you have three basic trophic levels in the economy of nature. It's the same in the human economy. There's nothing else unless we have that agricultural base. And it's that agricultural base that is efficient enough, but also productive, powerful enough, productive enough in real time, year after year after years, especially from the grain belts of the world, that frees the hands for the division of labor into all the manufacturing activity and services. So you're going up in trophic levels there as well, from the agro-extractive sectors to the heavy manufacturing, to the lighter manufacturing, to the very light manufacturing that intergrades with service sectors like so-called information technology and so on. And when you keep that in mind, that we're talking now in the aggregate, we can't just talk about a transportation sector, we can't talk about it, we have to consider it as a whole, in the aggregate. Economic growth, which is an increase of population times per capita consumption. It's measured with GDP. And that GDP, by the way, is reflected by the real money supply. That ratio should stay constant if you're not going to have inflation. Well, then you can see that every increment of growth, no matter how efficient you get, you're going to need more surplus production at the base to free those hands for more division of labor, more exchanging of money, real money, not inflated money. So efficiency, increasing efficiency will buy us time when we are, as John mentioned, as we are very wasteful. It definitely will buy us a lot of time. But we're already out of a lot of time. We've squeezed the planet for a lot of technological progress. Let me explain what I mean by squeezing the planet for a lot of technological progress. You guys are, you're familiar with manna from heaven, biblical manna from heaven. Well, that's not what technological progress is. Technological progress requires research and development, R&D. R&D at this point in history is a huge expense. We're at like $400 billion a year in the USA just on R&D. And the reason so much money is required for that is because the low-hanging fruits are all gone. You know, technological progress gives us more growth in three major ways: with explorative progress, extractive progress, and then, like to John's point, increasing end-use efficiency, they call it. But the bulk of that R&D goes to the explorative and extractive. The end use, there's a lot of problems with that. For one thing, there's the second law of thermodynamics. You cannot get 100% efficient. And the little longer story to that metaphysically, maybe God could. See, God could because it takes infinity to reach 100% efficiency. That's the physical argument, you know. If you're 0% efficient, you can do that right away. But if you want to get more and more efficient, it takes more and more time. Think of the Atwood machine, or even just a teetotter. You want to lift that bundle up fast. You put a heavy weight on this side, and bam, there it goes. But you wasted a lot of energy. You wasted kinetic energy in particular. If you want to do it very efficiently, you can lift that bundle with an equally sized bundle plus a P, with a little startup investment. You can lift it, but it'll take forever. And it'll take a long time. And therefore, it's not relevant to the marketplace or to any socialist or central planning government either. So we're not going to get anywhere near the highest reaches of efficiency. We've got to just deal with the fact that there's death, taxes, and limits to growth. You know, what's wrong with limits? I mean, what would it be like if there were no limits? No one would ever be satisfied with anything. Just want more and more and more and more and more and more and more. It's crazy. Of course there are limits. We're in the 21st century, and an ASP has the potential to break through and re-engage that common sense that was plentiful in the 19th century. You know, people talked all the time about land, labor, and capital, and limits, all the way up until, well, you know, President Carter talked in not always the clearest terms, but he was essentially talking about limits to growth with the speech that should never have been insulted as much with the label of the malaise speech. You know, he was speaking some really important truths in that speech. Franklin D. Roosevelt recognized limits to growth. He spoke more clearly about them than Carter did. So we need to harken back to common sense and historical wisdom and engage the sciences that are so clear about limits. Yeah, Skylar.
Yeah, I think a big part of the problem is that so many of the policies require short-term sacrifices from people, and you know, the populist right, and even to some extent, you know, the labor left would have a hard time trusting anyone asking of that. You know, we see with some of what's going on with the farmers in Europe and all kinds of things like that. Like, is it, you know, how do you deal with some of the political fallout of that? You know, where any major environmental reforms like this could cause consequences that could make things, you know, not actually help because of all of the political fallout.
Yeah, well, that's beyond my pay grade. I have thought about that as well, though. That's a daunting thing. Nobody wants to make the sacrifice, but some of us make little ones, right? I mean, I wouldn't mind driving a Hummer, trashing my way all the way back to DC with it. It'd be kind of, you know, have its own moments. but a lot of us don't. So we're examples here. We're no ecological saints or saints of any kind, probably, or maybe with some exceptions here. But there's some leadership being found with ASP, with your plank number 7 or section number 7. And I think maybe there is a latent sense of responsibility for some reasonable level of self. Well, here's the point we got to get across before it's too late. I mean, there's a lot of water that's already under the bridge, but if we don't apply some self-restraint with consumption and economic growth, then what's going to happen? It's going to be way worse than that cumulative sacrifices that we would have made, because, well, one thing that's going to happen more of is war. We like to say at Cassie, peace is a steady state economy. You can't have peace when you're pushing relentlessly into the limits to growth. And degrowth over too long a time, that's suicidal. I don't know if you call that peace. There's a movement in Europe for degrowth, and we're starting to recognize in ecological macroeconomics that given that we're in overshoot, we actually may need some degrowth toward a more sustainable or happier steady state economy. There's more room for people and more per capita resources. Yeah.
Yeah, what, if anything, I mean, a lot of what you've talked about is kind of a cautionary kind of thing. What, if anything, makes you optimistic for the future? And if that is something that you struggle with at this time, what would you need to see to be more optimistic?
What makes us optimistic is you guys and Pope Francis. We need to see more of you guys and more of Pope Francis, and then a successor to Pope Francis that is, equally attuned to, creation and caring for that. Other things, though, that encourage us, well, all right, the European degrowth movement, for all their flaws, and they do have them, there tends to be a Marxist sort of layer, or how would you put it, contingent, that in some cases I think is kind of using the degrowth movement to ride the coattails of. But the degrowth movement, the future looks bright for the degrowth movement in Europe. They're proliferating as fast as you guys are. And what we have to wonder about sometimes is which of our groups have a cap that's not anywhere near political effectiveness. And that could turn out to be the case with the degrowth movement in Europe. I don't think it'll turn out to be the case with ASP because, like I say, I think you're what a lot of people out there are looking for at this point. They're tired of that polarization, that extreme partisanship. And so I'm really glad to be, even in the mix at all. Otherwise, there aren't a whole lot of really encouraging things. Any other questions or? Well, I'll just say that I'm kind of an aggressive pamphleteer. I travel so far to get to these conferences, and so I put this thing out on every chair. It says, take a position. I would at least ask you to sometime read the position back there. It's on the table back there. It's 16 sentences. It's common sense and sound science. And I believe it's congruent with the ASP platform. So thanks again, and see you around, hopefully.